Hello, hello, GTeX family. Hope you are well. What didn't happen in the past few weeks? I mean, between coronavirus, between George Floyd death, and Black Lives Matter movement, and the riots and the protests, and what didn't happen? So I decided to do this particular Facebook Live with Lovelda, with my wife, my gorgeous wife. Uh,
Not looking so gorgeous right now, though, babe.
oh, you always look gorgeous,
This
baby.
is, yeah, it's
You
not a
always
great
look.
PR moment for me.
No,
It's
you,
just
you,
like,
you always look gorgeous. You always look gorgeous.
but you know what? You're the
I
best.
know you're the best. No, you're the
No,
best.
but you're the
No, but you're
best.
the best. So
I've
anyway,
got to laugh. It's
we
been horrible.
were we decided I decided to do this particular live because there is a lot of miscommunication going on. It's a very difficult situation. White people don't know how to communicate with black people. Black people don't know how to communicate with white people. White people don't know how to communicate with other white people. Black people don't know how to communicate with other black people. That is a
It's
palaver.
a minefield.
And Lovalda's been my PR agent for the past few days. So literally, I, like, as a white man, I don't know what to write. I want to talk about stuff, but I don't know what's offensive, what's not. And I think there is a lot in this conversation, this space to be created for different cultures and different backgrounds to come together and really understand each other. So and understanding how can we communicate it without creating more hurt, more pain, more conflict, and that's why we're doing this today. So, PR agent, are you?
Firstly, I am like, let me just say this. I can't speak for all black people, so I can only speak from my perspective. So it might help to have some context around what the conversation is that's actually happening, and then my background and position, because there's certain things I can't speak to because I haven't experienced the plethora of things. Um, but I can see kind of both sides of the story and a little bit of pain. And by both sides of the story, to be clear, the beating in this and killing people, I don't see that's just senseless nonsense. By both sides, I can see both sides wanting to communicate and help, but sometimes it's just not going right. So I some of you know me, some of you don't know me so well. I grew up in international schools. So my friends and my background was always from the age of 4 until 16. I was always around people of multiple nationalities because I grew up in a black country in an international school with Australian teachers, New Zealand teachers, African friends, American friends, Australian friends, Chinese friends, Indian friends. Like it, so I was blessed in so much as I grew up in a little bit of a bubble in that regard. And then when I moved to the UK, I went into my sister and I were the only black kids in the school. Um, I've always known because I'm black, works things are going to be harder. And oh, can
No, no,
everybody hear? Okay.
no, it's me.
I've always known that because of the color of my skin, things would be because of the color of my skin and that I'm female, things would just might be just a bit more difficult because I knew I would be coming up against things. And there were conversations that would have been had in my household that may not have been had in my and households of some of my Caucasian friends, for want of a better term. So I'm not coming from a space where I have always been in a black community and lived around that space. I haven't. I've always been in a multinational space. So I can't speak for black people who've grown up in purely black backgrounds where they would have been experiencing racism every day in and day out. That was not my personal experience growing up at all. Um, but what I did get to see was ignorant comments and ignorant statements. And at school I had a couple of people I fell out with. At university I had people I needed to pull up on stuff, but I've always come at it from they don't know any better. But that's been my experience. So that's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement in a whole, there are multiple layers of conversation under one heading. Right? So it started from police brutality in the US. That's actually what drove the conversation. And from there it has evolved to include um from there it's evolved to include multiple um dimensions within under the same category. So firstly, if you're speaking to somebody who's in the US and who's in the midst of it, they're very much, what I'm seeing is it's a big conversation around police brutality in the US. But what's happened is the conversation over the last few weeks has expanded to include racism in general. Racism, whether it is conscious or unconscious racism, because we're all a little bit racist, right? So we're just not all consciously racist. We're not all out there doing crazy stuff, but we all have our unconscious bias, which would have us occasionally evoke racist-like behavior. It's a distinction, and it's evolved to then look at, as business owners, as speakers, what is our personal responsibilities around making a change? Where else does this show up? Actually, yes, but the racism is showing up in the office and it's also showing up at schools. And how do I educate my kids better? So it's a multifaceted, multi-layered,
That's what makes this
multi-dimensional
conversation so difficult,
problem.
because there is just so many layers one on top of the other. Like when the more we're talking in the past few days, like what there is so many layers which you can see what happened, from police brutality to
I mean, it'll be
racism
silly
to
things. I was just talking to a friend of mine who was explaining that one of our mutual friends used to be taken out of PE class, out of maths class, every time she was in maths to go and play PE. Like literally, like just freaking with her education. So it's lots of little things. So not everybody who is black, who is speaking up about the conscious stuff or the things that we'd advertently see as bad right now. I've had people make comments. I'll give you another example of like what I would put in the unconscious ignorant category. At university, I was actually part of an international
yeah.
group. Just so you can understand the plethora of what people are speaking to. I was part of an international. You take my vino. International group at uni, which was all about diversity, and the whole program we were promoting was around this. And we're in this management committee, and there's a mix of us. There's I think there's 5 of us. There's 3 white guys, three white, 1 Asian, and myself. So we had a bit of a blend. And we were doing this meeting, and Grace was her name. Couldn't make that meeting for whatever reason, and the 4 of us are sat there talking about what we're going to be doing for the year. And somebody made a comment around Grace is Chinese, by the way. So this is not a black thing, but Grace was Chinese. This is important for the story. And somebody made a comment about those Chinese students who always sit together right at the front of the class. Like, why don't they integrate? And I almost lost it, because I don't think they were meaning badly, but I said, let's think about it for a moment. These people have left their country, traveled to the other side of the world to speak their second, maybe third language, to be educated where they know nobody. And they happen to have found some people to which there is some minute thing that would bring them together, that maybe they could remember a food that they all ate at home, and so they stay together. Surely it's our responsibility, not theirs, to learn more. And I think that story, I mean, I stormed off at that point and I said, look, if Grace were here, she'd be absolutely disgusted. And I can't even believe I'm dealing with this crap right now. And they sat with it, and bless them, they've all become even more beautiful human beings as a result of the conversation. But I was just very angry at that moment. And we came back and they apologized. And I never told Grace because I didn't think she needed to hear that. It was a learning moment. But the point being that unless we can start to open up to understand what is going on in the world of those who are affected from their perspective, and my perspective as a black woman and somebody else's perspective as a black woman and somebody else's as a black man may be slightly different. Yeah. There are some commonalities across the piece, and there are some interpretations in which people would get this kind of mixed up and muddled up. So I can speak to some generalizations, but I'm going to give it a caveat that it's not the same for everybody all of the time. But if we're going to take the view of they should come and do this, it's not going to help. If we can ask more questions and stay open and learn and understand, and I'm learning, I don't have all the answers. I'm not always going to get this right. Somebody checked me today because I didn't show up on Instagram. But it's how you do it that will drive an impact. And I showed up and explained myself, but I'm grateful for her for doing it. So, don't think all the white people have got it wrong and all the black people have got it right. Nope, I see fault on both sides.
It's a very complex matter. I mean, there is a Parbesh that is saying, biases, racism, sexism, prejudice, like preconceived opinions that impact a group. Everyone has biases, and not everyone has prejudice actions. I think that's a very valid point from Parvesh. And it is what I would love to invite now the conversation, because we had a conversation privately in the group of lifetime member earlier, and no, it's very difficult to see what to do. Like right now is almost anything you're going to do is gonna hurt someone. Anything you're going to do is gonna trigger something in someone, whether they're black, white, whether they're black, they're going to trigger it. And so that's what makes also the conversation more difficult, because some people would rather say, you know what, I know this is, I don't know how to put this across. I would love to support, but I've seen some of my friends that were white and they put out something for support and then they got lynched. And then we have from the other side people that are saying, well, but I need to take my time before I comment or before I'm talking about something. So I'm not ready, whether they are white or whether they are black. Some black people, they feel pressured from why haven't you said something?
Where have you been? Where's
Where
your
have you been?
support?
Like, where have you saying? And then white people, they say, why haven't you said something? And then they say something and they say, why have you said it? It is tough. It is
So
tough. So how can we navigate a bit more this?
here's my thoughts, right? When I talk about this, I seek to take race out of it for a moment, so it's relatable to everybody, and then you can relay a race back onto it, right? Because if we're talking in the context of something we're not
Can we
understand,
take a race out of this conversation?
yes and no. So in this particular instance, if we're talking about speaking up about something, if I were to think about it in relation to something else, so that's what I mean by take race out of it for a moment and then we relay it back on. So people are saying, why is it not helpful to say, to speak up, and why are people lynching me? And I don't feel like I can speak up because somebody's lynching me. If you can understand that there are lots of people, because of the color of their skin, who are in a huge amount of pain and a huge amount of anger and a huge amount of frustration. Some may have been trying to have their voices heard for years and not be heard. Some of them may have been targeted for years, not simply due to the color of their skin. There is hurt that's on many different levels. Some of it's personal because it's something personal that's happened to them. Some of it's something that's happened outside of them, right? So if we were to replace black with a child who'd grown up in a house that was abusive, right? And you go to give them a hug and they punch you in the face. Would you then walk away and say, I'm not hugging any more children like this because they punched me in the face. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. I can't help. I'm going to sit on the sidelines and just let them be in pain. And I'm not making the punch in the face right, just to be clear. That reaction is not right. But we know that anybody who's been in a space of pain for years, whether it is abuse or neglect or anything like that, if they've been in that space for years, there are inbuilt triggers where when they finally get that space, it's not clear. They don't communicate clearly. It doesn't come out nice. There's a trigger and then they see you as that person. It's as some, you just are representative of something else that had happened and you've come at them in a way that looks the same. So if you know somebody's been abused, when you lift your hand, initially they're braced because they're used to that leading to something else, right? So when you remember that, then saying, but I was hit too, doesn't make any sense, especially if it's something that you're beyond. So if you think of it, if you can remember that many people are in a huge amount of pain, or you're saying, can you explain it to me? Even though you're in a lot of hurt, can you explain it to me right now? Why is this? You kind of have to be a little bit more patient. You kind of have to have a little bit more tolerance. You kind of have to ask a few more questions. But you wouldn't go into that scenario and start telling them how they should feel or say, do you know what? Loads of people are abused. You're a child, you've been abused, but adults are abused too. And dogs and animals have been abused for years as well. Why are we just talking about child abuse? Why can't we talk about animal abuse at the same time? Because child abuse is a problem and it's their problem that they're facing right now, and attention and spotlight is on that. So it is disrespectful and it's dismissive in that guise to then say that. So if you can, I don't care if it's child abuse or if it's something equally that you can relate to where somebody is in pain, like anguish, where they're broken, their heart is breaking, they've been in that space for a while, and it's the first time that they've had a space to be heard.
Yeah.
Anything other than an acknowledgement of that as a starting point, or if no acknowledgement is in your response, it's probably going to elicit a knee-jerk reaction, which I'm not condoning, because I'm a speak to people of color too who've been doing that shizzle. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. It creates more divide. I'm not
I
for
want to
that
say
either.
that there is, for example, like even Parvez saying like I was hit too. That person actually group is looking for significance, and when you move away from the context from the conversation, it changes the entire nature of the conversation. And there are a lot of people that are saying no. There is this old debate at the moment. Black life matters. No, not Black life matters. All life matters. Yes, that's true. All life matters, but this now takes away from that conversation about what happens in the black community.
The
And
only thing I can liken it to is saying, we're talking about child abuse, but there's domestic abuse. We should talk about domestic abuse, but we're talking about child abuse. But domestic abuse, all abuse, you know what? There's abuse in the workplace as well. Why can't we just talk about this thing here right now? Because all you're saying is, let's just lump it all together so we can't
it
deal
lands
with
with
it.
is like your problem is not important to me. That's what he said. Like what you're going through, what you're experiencing right now, is not important to me. That's how it lands.
It lands as it's not important, and it also lands as there's not a space for this conversation. There isn't a space for us to be able to talk about this because it's always going to be about something else. It's always going to be about all of these other things. But this is a thing that is fundamentally important. So why do we have to talk about everything else at the same time? There's somebody in this group said it beautifully. There's a space to talk about domestic abuse. There's a space to talk about child abuse. There's a space to talk about LGBT. There's a space to talk about mental health issues. Why can't there just be a space to talk about abuse that happens to Black people? That doesn't invalidate the other spaces. It doesn't mean the other spaces don't exist. It doesn't mean that we're saying this space is more important than the other spaces. We're just saying, can we just have a space, please, to talk about this issue and only this issue and nothing else but this issue, because this is the issue right now. And if it was somebody who'd come to you who'd been hurt, you wouldn't then say, oh, that's nice, but my back hurt once too. So when you can take the race thing out and replace it with something else, you may begin to start to understand why the backlash comes from all lives matter. Because normally in most other contexts, we wouldn't then, when somebody says here's a problem and here's a pain, lump a whole bunch of other crap on top of it and say, but let's speak about a whole thing that's going to water this specific issue down.
It's almost like someone had a family member that died, and then they say, oh, but my uncle died, and that doesn't take away the pain that the person had that loss. And what we need to understand right now, which has been a very weird experience for me, and that's why I'm emotional. I'm an emotional person, and I do things impulsively. So I was like, no, frick, I gotta do this live. I gotta do the thing with the lifetime members and the private group that we did before. And the what hurts is I, I don't know how to explain it, but I've never, or very rarely, not that I'm experiencing it recently, I've been hurt so much in my life. I feel pain and I'm not even involved. I'm a white man. So far face wise from the black community. But it hurts, and I tap into some pain. Whatever happened, I don't know. But if I can just feel a fraction of what people might feel about this situation, I think is our duty as human beings to encourage the conversation and to understand that when you are shutting someone down that says, hey, listen, we have a problem we need to address, and you say, no, but there are all these other problems, what you're saying right now is, no, I don't care about you. I don't care about you. I don't care about your people. I don't care about your problems. And that's the message that come across. It's not maybe what you want to say, but that's the message that come across. And the other thing that happened, which really hurt, which I would love to expand right now, is about shutting the conversations down, because it's not an easy conversation. This was one of the most like the post that I wrote this morning was one of this probably the most difficult post I've ever had to write. I mean, how many times we went through the
We
freaking post together?
probably edited that about a good 5 or 6 times before we could get the tone. I'm not even going to say right, close to hitting the
It's
mark. Let's
impossible.
put it.
It's
It's not.
impossible to. There is no right here. There is no things that can be done right. But when the conversation shuts down, when there are communities that instead of encouraging the conversation, what they're saying is, this is not the place because this is business, right? It happened frequently. I've heard many people commenting on this. It's like, no, this is not a place for this. This is just business. We don't talk about these topics.
So
How does the
here's my
leave
view on
people?
it. And Danny, thanks for piping up. I think I've seen a few other people in here as well, kind of speaking
Yeah,
around
we
it.
got
And I
Danny,
will.
we got Genevieve, we got Parvesh, Ik.
So for me personally, how it lands is, look, if that's congruently how you have been on all topics and themes and anything that has ever come into your group and your space that is literally outside of this, and you have been to the letter with every single thing that you've ever said that it's always business, I respect you for that. But if you've invited COVID-19 discussions, if you've invited discussions around any other topical event happening ever, but you can't open a discussion around this, that isn't leadership. And you need to check yourself. That's just my position on it. Because I've seen, I'm not going to say it's not appropriate in all places all of the time.
Yeah.
And there's a way in which the conversation needs to be facilitated, and it does take facilitation, and there's responsibility of the leader of the group and every individual within the group to have a constructive conversation rather than to play a blame game. And I absolutely I have no problem in somebody shutting down a conversation where it's like, we're not ready to have this because we tried and people are too raw and they're too angry, but this is why I'm shutting it down here, because we can't do it constructively. Because people's feelings are just too raw that we're not ready to do it, or we're not going to do this in a group setting. So I'm just going to address it in a single call, and then we're not going to have this conversation anymore because I don't feel skilled enough to do it. Yeah. But for somebody to bring something to the table, if it's brought to the table in a constructive manner, and if the context is set well, to shut it down is not helpful. This is not a time to avoid something, especially if you've invited other conversations in your group, or you've invited other conversations and you've piped up about COVID-19, which only happened a little while ago, but then you want to shut this down. I'm telling you, people will see it for what it is and they're not going to like it. It doesn't look good. You could talk about COVID-19, which was not business, right? So if you want to say it's all about business, here's what I suggest. Why don't you go and ask that the conversation, the COVID-19 was a business related conversation about how we're going to get out of this. This is a conversation about how we bring more diversity into business, but I want to keep it strictly business. So you're welcome to set ground rules. You're welcome to set ways of or parameters to work within. But honestly, to say not here, this is not a conversation that's welcome in any way, shape, or form. I was gonna write something today, and I'll share it. And it came from the experience that Simone shared in this group and in various different places around this idea of being racist or non-racist. And I hate that word because it's very triggering to people. I always start with assuming everybody is not a racist, right? And in my view, I think that you get to sit very comfortably in a space of non-racist, and you can take racist and say non-sexist, non-homophobic, non-whatever. You get to sit in the non-space until or unless such time that something is in your space for you to address in relation to that thing you say that you're against. So if we take Black Lives Matter and you say, I'm not a racist, and something comes into your space which is presenting as racism or on that corner, how you deal with that, either you get to show that you're anti this and you step up, or you get to demonstrate racist-like behavior in that moment. And this doesn't define you as a racist for life. It's a moment for you to stop and look at yourself and say, I could have done better.
Yeah.
I could have done better. We make mistakes. We don't know how to deal with this. I could have done better. I could have this is what I'm going to do and what I'm going to take from it. I also say that the words that we use, and I will say this whether you're Black, white, Asian, Puerto Rican, I don't care. The words that we use have a huge impact, and we have a responsibility for what we say and how we say it. And that is regardless, because I have watched on the other side, I've spoke about the anger and the hurt of people of color. But I've also watched very well-meaning people jump in and get lynched. Getting lynched is just the start. I already spoke to what that meant. But here's the thing. When you go out and you're upset about something and you shout and you scream and you curse and you point the finger and you label people as this, that, and the other, and you make them wrong and you make them bad and you put them in their place and you tell them what for, and you do it in an aggressive manner, they don't hear your words. They don't hear them. It's not effective. It doesn't help the change. It drives more division, and that's not what we want. At least that's not what I want. I don't think it's what anybody else here wants. It doesn't help. And that doesn't mean you don't get to be angry and pissed off and upset and frustrated and all of those sorts of things. It doesn't mean you don't get to feel that. You absolutely get to feel that. You absolutely are okay with feeling hurt and guilt and shame or whatever it is that's going on for you. I'm not saying your feelings aren't valid. I'm saying when you communicate them and how you communicate them is a responsibility, where either you're going to communicate in such a way that you're going to help to drive change, or you're going to communicate in such a way that you're going to be part of the divide. And it doesn't matter where you are, whether you are Black, white, Asian, Puerto Rican, what you say in this moment is going to head in one direction or the other. And so it's worth it. Like, if you're not in a position to be able to talk because it's so raw, don't. It's okay. And then people who be judging, you need to stop judging. Everybody got to go on their own dang journey. Sorry, I went a little retro
I'm
there.
going to go back into the silence in a moment, and not sharing, because I think there is a lot to be said in silence. I want to start addressing the point from a community point of view. Everyone here runs businesses. We build communities with clients, and I think that the worst thing we can do right now is to shut the conversation down because it's not comfortable, because it's not convenient, because we don't know how to handle that conversation. All the reasons why, or it comes at the wrong time. There is not the wrong time. This is the time. It's coming, and the conversation is there. And if we avoid to have that conversation, no matter how hard it is, then we are on a business level. We send a message, and the message that we send, if we don't address the conversation, is I don't care about what's going on around. That's the message that we send if we don't say anything. And the reason why I've been sending the post, even this morning, in the GTeX family, to open and invite an honest conversation, it will say we don't know the answers. We need to talk about this. And I even put some guidelines. Hey, I would love for this conversation. These are the guidelines on the conversation. The first comment I received was, people are not commenting here because you said already, you are policing already the freaking conversation. You're already setting the guidelines. And so I'm the first one, I'm going to get it wrong because I don't know how to, very few people know how to handle this conversation right now. But I'm not going to stop trying to find a solution so I can learn and having meaningful exchanges. And I think that if in your communities I invite you to start building those conversations, reach out to the Black members of your community and say, how you doing? Are you alright? That goes a long way from what I've heard and from all the conversations I had. So now from the topic of community, I want to move to the topic of silence. Because there is silence is judged now. And if you are a Black person, you're not talking and you're silent, then
where are you? Do you not care? Are you not interested?
If you are a white person and you're silent and you're witnessing something, now you're a racist.
Let me just pick up on that. If you're a white person and you've ever been silent while shit's been going on, you've had racist behavior in that moment, in the same way that if you're a man and you've ever witnessed a woman being put in a position that was unjust and you didn't do anything, in that moment you were sexist. It's not any different,
Now,
right?
the question that I have is, because there is this conversation going on of, okay, if a black person now is taking their time and they don't say anything,
Mm-hmm.
then it's okay because they're hurt and they're processing, and I understand that. And there is also the other counterpart from a lot of white people that I know, which says, no, I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to write, I didn't want to add, I'm taking my time to process this and then write something. So the situation are very similar in terms of I want to say something that matters and I want to say something meaningful.
So I think it depends on your intent and where you're at. So I had this very thing today where I got called by somebody in my Instagram profile about not showing up. But I'm a stand for strong, powerful women. I am not demonstrating being powerful by not speaking and not saying anything straight away. And so, and at the same time, I need a little space to process. And but I didn't avoid her question. I didn't avoid what she was saying. I actually went live straight away, and I said, firstly, I didn't realize anybody was looking on this platform. I'm not that active. Um, and secondly, just because I haven't said anything doesn't mean I haven't been doing anything. You know, and please ask questions rather than to make statements. And the reason I answered her was because she asked me, "Is there a reason?" I just want you to. You don't have to explain it to me, but I would like to understand why you haven't spoken up on this. And we had a beautiful exchange and we're cool because she goes, because if you hadn't said anything, I probably would have just unfollowed you, because here's how it lands from my perspective, which is this is a big thing. I respect you. I've been looking up to you for a while. It's a big thing in my life and you just don't seem to give a crap. Because at the same time, I've been promoting my podcast. So she's like, I'm seeing all this podcast promotion, but nothing on this particular matter. But she approached it openly as a question rather than as a statement. And I know of friends of mine who've had the opposite, where people are just like, you don't care, I'm unfollowing, blah, blah, blah. So the first thing is, in relation to somebody commenting about the issue for the first time, they have to do that in their own time, in their own way, if they have the capacity to do it. Because for some people, when you're in a lot of pain, it's like saying, you're grieving. You didn't tell us that such and such passed. Well, you know what? I've been like a pool on the floor for the last 3 days. Like, I've had other things that are concerning me. My daughter's been crying like nobody's business. I don't know how to explain it to this one. This is happening with the paperwork. And you want me to take a moment to come on social media and put a square up. Why? I'm dealing with it. I will be back, right? So there is a degree of, you have absolute right to ask those people who you have been following and you want an answer from, why? Why is it you've been quiet? Don't judge them and go in and say, you haven't been standing up, and assume that because they haven't made a public statement that they're not behind it, right? So that's from the sort of Black perspective. And secondly, as a leader, if you're in that position where people are knocking on your door and asking you, you kind of have to ask yourself, am I demonstrating the leadership I want to see in the world right now? And when I asked myself the question, I was like, I'm not. I can't be a stand for female speakers and be a stand for diversity and not be speaking up about this. I don't have a choice. I need to get there as quickly as I can, but I don't need to be forced into commenting on this any sooner than I want to. That's on my own terms. Except if it's in my face and I see some shizzle going down, because I have called some people, all kinds of people on stuff, before I went and commented on things. I've seen things on individual posts, and if I've seen it, I've stepped in and taken immediate action around those things because they need action now. But in relation to how I address my community and what statement it is that I'm putting out to people, I will do that in my time, in my way, but I have to do it.
So the conversation is, if you are doing your statement to your community, take your time. But also there is the element of not taking too much time.
Don't take too much time.
Because,
even if the statement is, I'm considering
speaks, it. Silence is loud. And, then on the other side, if you see something happening in front of your eyes, don't just stop and sit
well,
down.
if you see something happening, the silence speaks for itself in that moment too.
I'm thinking about... and then there is a time to create a well-crafted message to your community, to your followers, to your social media. That takes time. I mean, I got my PR agent, thank God, that is...
and ask people.
But if you see something in front of you, otherwise you're part of the problem. And I say you, I'm saying I, because I'm the first one is guilty as everything with that. The amount of times that I saw something, whether it was on a bus, whether it was at an event, whether it was when I was at school, when I played basketball, you name it, I've seen it. Playing basketball, I grew up. Most of my friends were black. A lot of my friends now are black, uh, and I've not said when I could say something, and I by doing this, I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the problem. And that's also, I think, one of the reasons why this situation hit me really hard. Now that I'm talking through
Processing
it,
it.
yeah, I'm an emotional wreck right now.
I know, babe.
But I know you. Like I was like, she's getting through shit, and I'm the one who feels hurt. I don't know how that's.
This is why I say we've got to
just
have
like,
compassion regardless of what the color of your skin is, because everybody is processing things. If you wake up in the morning and you think I've been screwing this up, it's like, I can only liken it to having a child and waking up one day and realizing that you're the problem. Like, the reason your child is the way that you are is entirely up to you, and it's every decision that you've done. That is a hard pill to
it is.
swallow.
It is.
And I think there needs to be a little bit of compassion around it. What I want to say about not being part of the problem, look, I'll put it slightly differently. If you see something and you haven't spoken about it, you've made it okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've made it okay, because in that moment, you've allowed it to exist as if it's fine. So you, in your inaction in that moment, have made it okay. You've made it acceptable. You've put your seal of approval on it. Because sometimes you need to hear it the opposite way around, sometimes for something to land. Because I've heard it like, oh, you're part of the problem. And I'm like, eh. But when I start to think of it as actually, no, if I don't say anything, my silence is saying this is okay in my book. It's acceptable. Let it be. It's good. It's okay for things to be like this. Because if you saw somebody being beat in the street, you wouldn't just walk past. You wouldn't come to them after the fact and say, oh my gosh, I saw that person beating you. Like, are you okay? You'd call the cops. You'd jump in. You'd try and get somebody else to help. You do what you could in that moment because somebody is in pain, right? Because somebody was in pain in that particular moment. And so because it was a word rather than physical doesn't mean it's not having the same perpetual effect. So I just wanted to give a slightly different perspective on the same point.
No, it makes sense, and it is about everyone. If you are seeing something that is not just, is there are racist behaviors, there is persecution, there is all the things that I know here in this group we hate. Then call it, call it, and this is a message for me. This is a message for everyone who needs to hear it. Everyone who knows that they've let things slide, and where they know they should have said something. So now this brings me back to how, like, on social media. This is the final part of the conversation.
You actually had a structure? I just came for a chat.
I know you did. I've got.
Okay.
Yeah, just one of the time.
Just one of the few
But
times
I know,
you have a
but I
structure.
had to. I'm an emotional wreck. I told you. Otherwise, we don't know what we're talking about. Okay.
I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. I'm just giving it a whirl.
Wow. Now, whatever comes out is good though. So these are the cheesy moments that we have in the middle of talking about racism. I was like, we could. But now the social media environment is a tough environment to navigate, because when someone writes a comment or when someone writes a post, is a form of communication where you don't see, you don't hear that person, you don't feel the tone of their words. So it might be that the same thing that will end in one way if it's expressed verbally or in a meeting or in a Zoom call, whatever, written can blow up out of proportion or can be seen in a different way. And also the platform doesn't invite an exchange of ideas in real time. There is always a post, moment, respond, moment, respond, moment, respond. which invites only very short bite-sized conversation instead of like a longer constructed conversation, unless you guys are taking the time, everyone right now is taking the time to be here and listen to the full story. So from let's just start from black person perspective.
Okay.
Social media 101 guidelines
For not being a dick.
for not being a yes, that for not being a
How to
dick.
not be a dick on social media in relation to this particular topic. So, if you are somebody who's been impacted, I get it's exhausting right now to see comments that are really crazy, to see things that are kind of ignorant, and to just feel like you're just schooling people, right? I get it. I'm running. I'm the next time I pick up my phone, I'm going to say hi, Lovelda PR. Like it's a lot. It's a lot, and um, and it's frustrating and it's angering. But here's the thing: we've got to check ourselves before we respond. So the same way I've seen a lot of posts at the moment, and there's been a lot of attention on this idea of checking your white privilege. I also say that for those of us who were in this skin tone, you need to check your filters, right? You need to check what you're actually interpreting from what's been written. And yes, well intentioned can be clumsy and screwed up and wrong and ignorant and stupid, but it doesn't mean that in front of you is an ignorant, stupid racist. It doesn't mean that. It can mean it's a well meaning person who never before knew or understood why this thing was actually going to be a problem. And it's exhausting to explain it multiple times. It's exhausting to pick the phone up. It's exhausting to, but if you can find a group of resources that perhaps you can say to somebody, listen, I'm just going to assume that you may not understand why this sentence is going to be quite triggering for people reading your point. And I understand the sentiment of what you're saying, but here I suggest you read this, or I invite you to listen to this conversation. I would say, please keep the conversation open, because to point fingers and to blame and to get angry and to accuse everybody as if they're all, they were the person who prosecuted you and your family, is only going to drive a bigger divide, that we will be having more of a black white conversation. And I don't honestly believe that is the end goal of the majority of people who are involved in this dialogue. So if you are not capable right now of getting into it, switch it off. Switch off the social media. Block, follow, pause, put people on mute if you have to. Set guidelines for what people can post in your feed. Take yourself off it altogether. Give yourself a holiday if you have to. If it's too raw and too hard, and every time you open it, it's exhausting, it's okay to just not involve yourself anymore. But please do not put something out in anger and frustration. Pick up the phone and call somebody who understands you and your context and rant to the high hills. Like, have your group of people you can call and just be like, if I have to explain this shizzle one more time, I'm gonna lose my head, right? So that's it from that perspective. Like, we're all using filters, and sometimes we read something and we just think, did they just say that? You really have to go back and reread it and see if they did say something, or is it just that you're really quite heated right now and you're at your capacity, in which case step away and leave the comment. Somebody just trust that somebody else is going to take care of it.
And if I can add something, expect that whatever you're going to write or whatever you're going to post, understand that the social dynamic, socio-economical context in which we are living in at the moment, there is a predominant feeling of sadness, of hurt, and people are going to be more vocal now than probably they would normally be. And so don't stop that from happening. It's almost like you are sad, and I don't want to hear that. But if someone is expressing how they're feeling, instead of saying, "Oh, you know what? No, that's not true," or "That's not real," or "But I think in a different way," just saying, "I hear you."
Nobody likes that friend where every time you go to speak, they've got something else that they want to tell you about their
Yeah.
situation that's the same. This is no different, right?
Mm.
Nobody likes that friend. You call them and you're like, girl, this thing happened and I'm feeling really upset. And they go, oh, yeah, when my boyfriend broke up with me, you know, that was really sad. You just think, did you hear anything I just said here? So it's not to say if you're going to give an opinion or give a fresh perspective, first acknowledge. Because if there's no acknowledgement, it's actually going to be much more difficult for your words to be heard.
Yes.
But if you can first acknowledge, I see you, I hear you, my heart goes out for you. Acknowledge what's been said, acknowledge the pain, and then add to it. But if you just chime in with an opinion, it smacks of, yes, okay, but me.
It does. It does. And I think that this mosquito wants the wine.
Oh, don't say that.
That's probably not. We gotta.
I'm not having no drunken mosquitoes. I'm a fight it for my wine.
So it is. It is exactly as Lovelda said. We need to allow the conversation to happen, not proving people wrong from what they feel. And I have to say, there was a moment in one of the conversation in this group today, in the GTeX family group, where I felt for a moment I wanted to stop because I felt it was going out of hand. And then I literally had to check with myself and say, you know what, that's exactly what we need for this conversation to go. And there is a difference between being this totally disrespectful to someone and a difference between creating a constructing conversation. So I know you're saying from a black person perspective is also like one of the things that you have done is you've been incredibly patient.
It's a lot of patience.
Oh my God, like the amount of calls that you had,
I've
the
been on
amount
the
of
phone
like
all day.
you're a PR agent of don't know how many people right now that they say, oh, but what if like as a white man or as a white person, I don't know, I will never be able to experience or to fully understand this dynamic. I will never be able to do that. The reason why I will never be able to do that is because I never experienced that. I didn't grow up in that situation, that environment.
Here's the best way to put it. So I used to work for a company called Disability Mobility. I think it's Mobility. I can't even remember the name of it. But anyway, they do scooters and cars for people with disabilities. And it's purely that marketplace. And one of the trainings you'd have to go on was something along the line of disability awareness. And in that program, you would be taught what was considered acceptable and you would get to learn what was okay, right? So if somebody's in a wheelchair, is it okay? Do you speak to them standing up and looking down at them? Or should you sit next to them? Should you look at them at eye level? How do these feel to them? I haven't sat in a wheelchair all my life. Like, I don't know if it's condescending if I come down to you, or is that what you want because now I can look you in the eye, right? If somebody is disabled, do they want help? Should I ask them, do I just go in and support them, or is that, but until I was in a training that was developed by working with a whole bunch of people who live and breathe this, to allow me to have some principles to understand that when I'm dealing with these customers, this is an appropriate way to approach them such that they feel human, right? And I just think if you have not experienced and you don't understand the history, the centuries of history, and all of that sort of stuff, and you haven't been in this space before, now is the time to put yourself on a Black education program of some description, right? You kind of have to understand it because otherwise you don't know. You think you're being helpful talking to somebody who's disabled by getting on your knee and coming up close to them. You think that's helpful. You think it's helpful when you see them getting out of a car that you would help them. They don't want your help, actually, because the vast majority of people, if you don't ask them, they don't like that. That's what I learned, right? But I didn't know that. And, and so because staff hadn't known that and they're well-meaning and well-intentioned, they'd piss off a client and they'd piss off a customer because they didn't ask the question and they didn't have, that's why they brought the education in, just to make sure that every employee within the organization, regardless of where you worked, understood that space enough. And you're not always going to get it right, but there are some primary pillars in which you say you do this and it's normally interpreted like this. Even though this is what you think you're doing, it's normally interpreted like X. And when you can understand why that interpretation is there behind certain phrases. I'll give you an example in this context. I don't see color. What you mean is, I don't see you as any different. I see you as just like any other human being. I embrace you and love you no different to anybody else. What we hear is, I don't see you because I'm black. So if you don't see color and you don't see black, you don't see me. I don't see this as an issue. I don't see this as important enough to talk about. That's what's heard, right?
Yeah.
That's not what you meant, but that's how it lands. And so, unless you can understand why and be open to understanding and put yourself on an education program, the same way I had to go on an education program to understand how to engage with disabled customers in a way that wasn't going to piss them off and inadvertently upset them. You can't just sit there and say, I don't know what to say. You actively have to go out and start to learn. There's lots of resources popping up. I think I'm going to put a group together for exactly this matter. I don't know yet. But there's lots of resources popping up. There's lots of things you can Google now because there's many people creating resources that will allow you to understand rather than continue to fight the point. But I don't see color. Understand that what you're saying and what they're hearing are two different things. So it doesn't matter how many times you hear, I don't see color. All that's being heard is, I can't see you. What you're saying isn't important. I don't want to listen to you. This isn't an important issue for me. That's all they're hearing.
Why do you want to punch me in the face?
No.
What do I do to you now?
So I would urge people who are feeling uncomfortable about not knowing what to say. There isn't a perfect solution, but there are some common pillars. And the same way that if you didn't know how to deal with any particular society, let's say you're from here, you're traveling to Kenya, you don't know what that's like, you do some research before you got there and pissed off the Kenyans. Or you're going to China, you do some research and you figure out what to say and what's acceptable and how you greet people and some basic stuff so you don't piss them off. Or if you did piss them off because you didn't collect a card in the right way, you don't then say to them, but it doesn't matter. No, you seek to understand. So provided you're seeking to understand, I think you'll do really well in being able to communicate. If you're asking questions, if you're open, if you're checking your privilege and checking your filters, and sometimes it may be both, before you communicate, I think you'll put yourself in a reasonably strong position. Well, you may mess it up, but it's not a reason. I don't always get it right either.
You do, and there is for any white person, because I had many conversation with with a lot of conversation with myself lately, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but a lot of conversation also with other white people that are really good friends and don't know how to deal, what to post. No, if you have a black person that that you are on the same page, you say, hey, do you mind if I send you some stuff, because I really want to talk, but I just don't know if what I'm putting out can be correct. And what correct is a very fine line. I don't know if there is something correct to say.
I don't know that there's a correct, but I think
there is something that you can say. There is something that you can share. And when I was, and another thing that we can do is to get informed, to ask questions. There are a lot of documentaries that we can watch. And right now we are talking about this particular issue, and it is important that we take the first step to make the change in this society. And one of the moments where it hit me really hard about our responsibility as white people to make a change. It was actually at a speaking event where, when you arrive in the speaking circuit to a certain level, you actually really see a difference in ethnicity and in gender. You do. And the reason why it happens, and most of the time, is not because a lot of people that belong into these groups, they are racist or they're misogynist. No. Sometimes some people are. Not from my experience, the majority. But sometimes because like attracts like. So if I am a white person and I know a friend of mine who is another white person, I'll be more likely to invite them in the group because there is a sense of similarity. And it really hit me when I went to a few events and there were no black people speaking. But because it was a invitational, like speakers were coming together, it was like, hey, I know this person, everything was recommendation only. Someone else didn't come in, and that didn't create a change. And I'm talking about the speaking industry right now at the top level. But we could talk about government, so we can expand this conversation to boards, to companies, where it takes someone already in that position to say, hey, there is an issue here, let me change things up. And is unpopular, is probably difficult.
Well, it is, but I will bring you back to the event in Change Now, and I've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
Because with great power comes great responsibility, eh? Yeah. And there's a guy called Paul Pullman. He's the ex CEO of Unilever. And there were a couple of other guys on this panel. It's a panel of 3 men. And when I spoke to them in advance to prepare for the panel discussion, they all pretty much asked me the same thing, which I found quite surprising because I've never had it before. They all said to me, "Why is there no woman on this panel?" And I was like, I'm the event, is there a reason that there's no woman on this panel? And to the event organizers' credit, I had panels that were all female. I had mixed panels. This one happened to be an all-male panel. But here's the stance with all of these men on this panel. They were all behind the UN sustainability goals, of which one is gender diversity. And as a result, they do not speak on a panel in which at least one woman is present. None of them. It's like a stand that they make. They just will not do it. Unless there is a woman on the panel, they're not involved. So by the time I showed up to go do the thing, they'd already engineered in the background, found and brought a woman on. I added extra prep for me, but they were not going to sit there and undermine that. I'm for diversity. I'm 110% behind these UN goals. One of them is around diversity, and I'm not coming unless you put a woman on it. And so I feel like, honestly, every single individual, unless you go and take an audit and take stock of your current network, your current client base, who you refer, who you bring onto interviews in your podcast. Like, if you don't take stock and go, what is my diversity quota right now? Personally, I've done it for myself. I literally had to sit and go, okay, ethnicities, check. Oh shoot, do I have a balance of different different sexual preferences? Like, do I have gays and lesbians? And, I'm kind of like, oh, actually, yep, no, I've got that. I actually genuinely can sit here and say I have diversity in terms of religious backgrounds, ethnicities, sexual preferences, gender preferences. Like, I have the background of all of them within my circle of people that I engage with on a regular basis and my circle of friends. I can honestly, hand on heart, say that's the case. And therefore, what happens is when I recommend, when I pull together my podcast, when I put people forward for stuff, I am pulling from a diverse background. But here's the thing, if you're not pulling from a diverse background, you're probably perpetuating a problem. If you're sitting on a platform where you've got the ability to help others move forward, and you do not have that diversion. What's the word I'm looking
Diversity.
for? Diversity. I'm
That
like
one.
losing it now. If you don't have that diversity in the platforms in which you're picking from, then it unconsciously perpetuates the problem, because where you're going to go look in your network, and your network looks the same.
It all looks the same, and that's where the subconscious bias is perpetuated. In fact, there are a lot of comments here right now about subconscious biases and how they work, and it's difficult, yes, but it's necessary if we really want to do something about changes. So now I felt really, for me, it was really important to have these conversations for a few reasons. One, because been really hurt by this matter, and also it is a conversation around diversity and inclusion, which in GTeX we had from day one, um, and we never really talked publicly about that. Now, if you look at our team, for people that are involved and know the team, literally, you go around, there is there is always everyone which we include, and we never thought about it because for me it's a given. One of the reasons why I moved away from Italy, it is because it's a very closed and racist country, and I couldn't stand living there. One of the reasons why I loved London, and of course I'm experiencing London as a white man, but one of the reasons why I love London is that from the places where I've been, is the one which I saw where different cultures, different ethnicities, they were coming together and they were collaborating and working together. And I see that happening a lot. Of course, there is racism. Of course, there are elements of this. London is not excluded, it's not an idyllic paradise. But from the experience I had, it was where differences were more accepted. That's again from where I've seen it.
And it also just depends on where you've hung out. Like there'll be pockets in which
True.
things will be rife. It's just not. I'm not in those pockets most of the time. It's just not where I've frequented. It's just for whatever reason. It hasn't been my path. I've kind of skirted around some of those things. So even living in London, if you live in London in an area in which, or you know, your journey is one in which you're not experiencing some of these stuff, I think we've just got to all be okay with we're all a little bit ignorant around this, regardless of the color of your skin. We've all got a little bit of ignorance around this, and we could all do with learning a little bit more such that we can help each other to make the world a better place. That was quite deep, wasn't it?
That was deep. That was deep.
It's in here.
Now, I gotta say, I want to wrap up with a final thought, which is something I never said. I think, and I had this in my head for a while. But one of the reasons why I didn't talk much about the topic of diversity, of inclusion, and we always talk about this behind closed doors, but not openly. It is because I don't want to perpetuate, which is, I don't know where it's coming from, but I don't want to perpetrate the fact that, black people need a white man to help them out, which is, in my mind, it was linked to, if I talk about this as a white man, am I patronizing right now? And I never explored this out loud, so I would love we never talk even personally.
We haven't spoke.
No.
This is like raw.
Would love to hear your take on this.
Here's the thing: in order for change to happen, everybody needs to be involved, and especially those who are in the position where they're able to affect the change the most. So I would argue that actually, as a white man, you probably need to do more. Really, because we could do with the support. Like you probably need to do more. You probably do, because if I take the example of bless you.
No, you're welcome. Wow, and that goes in there.
If I take the example of Paul Pullman, who is white, middle-aged, and right behind the ideas of the UN sustainability goals, which are now driving how many companies are running their businesses as a result of it. And he could do that and put that in and throw that weight around and make it happen because he was the ex-CEO of Unilever. It's not a small company, right? And he ran it for years. So if anything, I would say on those global matters where you are most removed from it in the most position of privilege, it's almost your responsibility to step into it. So that would be the first thing I'd say. That being said, it's how you do it. So what's more impactful is setting down values, ways of being, principles in which you'll act, ways of auditing yourself, and doing that on a regular, consistent basis in every particular area of your life. What is not going to help and doesn't serve is, or comes across as patronizing, is let me give you a leg up because you need it, and I'm only going to do it now because it looks good. So if it comes across as a PR stunt, it's going to be a problem. And it normally comes across as a PR stunt if you jump out and start banging on about what you're doing really early on. I had a couple of friends of mine who really wanted to go, I want to feature you in this and that and the other. And I said, I'm going to tell you it's going to look like getting on the bandwagon to feature a whole, but I'm going to start featuring black people now. What we're interested
I've seen that. And it was like, I've seen on social media a lot of saying, "Oh, now we are giving discounts on our products to all our black customers."
And if you're gonna keep those discounts there forever, like great, I'll take it. But it's not helpful. What's more helpful, and what I've said to people is, look, if this is something you want to make a difference in, start to think about the company values that you want to have that are going to support it. Because I sat and thought about what are the posts I've seen from companies that I thought were really, really good. And the ones that really sat with me where I was like, I'm going to keep watching these guys. I'm really impressed by them. Thank you very much. Were not the ones that talked about the depth of their experience and how they're really upset and that sort of stuff from a business perspective. They were the ones that said, the best one I saw said something along the lines of, we're ashamed and we're shocked and we're disgraced at ourselves. What it shouldn't have taken an incident as big as what's happened with George Floyd for us to have recognized how we are part of the problem. We've taken a long, hard look at ourselves and we've discovered some things we frankly don't like. We realize that we have predominantly, from our position of power, only been promoting. This is a women's group, only white females on our podcast, only white females in our magazine, only white females in our joint lives. Like we have done an awful job at this. Here are 5 things that we're thinking of doing about it. And we've only just started brainstorming, but we wanted to let you know we're sorry and we promise to do better. And as a team, that's what we're going to be doing now, looking at how we do better. That to me is a better long-term statement that is genuine, that doesn't rush, because you wouldn't create a freaking new business overnight, doesn't rush to jump on something because it's a hot topic right now, but says, we've had a look, we don't like it. We're going to hold our hands up to this. We've come up with a couple of ideas straight away, but I'm not inviting a whole bunch of Black people to come on my podcast right now. That's a process that says we're going to go away and think about how we're going to do this. But what we are committed to is that you will see in these areas of our business, there will be more diversity. And we're sorry it's taken us this long. And I think you've got to think more, the businesses that are going to come out of this the most powerful are those that make long-term stands based on their values and based on the behaviors that they're going to implement over time versus based on taking an action right now that allows them to ride the wave of people's awareness on a particular topic, because folks don't notice that. And you might get a little bit of help, but it's probably in the long term not going to serve you, especially if it doesn't stay front of mind once the media and the press have moved on to another topic.
Yep. And I want to wrap up this conversation.
Is this your final thought now?
Well,
definitely.
we're supposed to. There was supposed to be like a 20 minutes conversation. We've been for about an hour and 10 minutes, and I think it was necessary. Everything that we talked about, and I want to thank everyone who is still here live or is gonna watch the recording or just join. And I want to finish.
Before you say that, if you need PR services, I'm not charging. This is not a chargeable thing.
Lovelda, check your post, the PR.
I'm not charging for this, but I honestly do want to help create a space in which people can have a conversation to move things forward. And I want people to know that if you're not sure, I'm not necessarily always going to get it right, but if you're not sure, if you want a second pair of eyes, if you just need to have a conversation to say, is there something I'm not seeing here that you're seeing? Is there a perspective that I might be missing? I'm more than happy to have those conversations. I'm going to pull together, I'm going to have to systemize it in some way and pull together some sort of structured group, because I feel like I'm running a PR company right now. But I do want to put that on the table and make that available to you. Just DM me and I'll answer as quickly as I can to help out.
I think that's brilliant. I want to be part of the group. I mean, I'm already part of the insider group, but but also when you go in that group. So I wanna wrap up with a message that was sent by in our group. So the reason in this group there is a post where I ask every person to invite and to share what your feelings are around the situation in a respectful way, as we gave already like plenty of guidelines here in this live. Jen said something today, Genevieve Show, which is one of our lifetime members, and she said something today that it really landed an important point for me. And she wrote, but I'm truly sick of the subtle racism, the denial of white privilege, the people that want to tell you no, it's not because you're black, and you blatantly know that it is. When people use the term you people and expect me not to be offended. When we are told to get over slavery, but we are still treated like slaves. When issues that affect black ethnic minorities are ignored. And if we bear this in mind, then we can bridge the gap, get closer, and really create a world where we will not have to have these conversations anymore. That's the world that I want to live in for me, for my kids, for the people that are going to be after us. So thank you very much
You're welcome.
for your PR services for the interview.
It's just Lovelda's insights.
Yeah,
I just want to help. I honestly just want to make it better, and I'm sick of the pain.
I hear you.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a
Yes.
lot.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Lots of love. Mwah. See you next time. Let me know what you think below. Ciao.